Hello, it's Monday. And I'm not usually here on Monday, but thank you all for joining me. Thank you to those of you in the chat who showed up on an odd day. But there's a lot going on with true crime in the last couple of weeks and with the holidays and all of the hearings that have been going on. It's taken a bit to get kind of caught up. And I wanted to wait to do an update on the Kansas moms, which we're going to talk about tonight, because they did have something go on right before the holiday. They had a preliminary hearing for one of the defendants. And, well, I'm going to have to give you a trigger warning because here we use the real words and we're going to talk about the real situation. And, well, from what has been said about the hearing, it was distressful. There wasn't anyone that wasn't uncomfortable, including law enforcement and everybody involved. So I understand if you can't hear the update. I get it. Um, but I do advocate for these victims, Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelley, because their story needs to be out here, because their justice needs to be had. And sometimes in the legal system, that's rough. And so all we can do here in like the true crime community is to make sure that all the facts get out there and the story gets told. And the justice system's going to do what the justice system does, you know. But we can at least advocate for their families that we hear them and we see them and what happened to Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelley should never happen to anyone, and especially not for the reasons it happened. For those of you not familiar, we're talking about the missing Kansas moms from March of this year, the end of March 2024. Veronica Butler, just 27 years old, was on her way to a supervised visit to see her kids, estranged from their father, who she never married, Wrangler Rickman. For 4 years had been embattled with a custody battle back and forth. She had the supervisor with her, Jilian Kelley, who was not the normal supervisor, which we've talked about before in some of the other coverage I've done on this case, which I did link in the description for those of you interested. We've talked about it 3 other times. She was helping out because the regular one who normally comes on the supervised visits was told by the grandmother of the children, Wrangler Rickman's mother, Tiffany Adams, that she wasn't needed and she should take some time off, as if there wouldn't be a visit. So she wasn't available for the scheduled visit. What strikes me the most about how wrong this whole situation is if we go back to that March day, Veronica Butler was on a win. She was just a week away from getting custody back of her children. She had worked diligently to prove she had a stable income and home. Because when she left Wrangler Rickman, of course, she didn't have a roof of her own. She had a place to stay, and the kids were always cared for. But all of these little subtleties were used against her by a very manipulative and well-crafted and well-connected woman, the grandmother, Tiffany Adams, who, when we get further into the story, will come off as the Wicked Witch of the West. Like she is the villain in this story. She's affected so many lives. And she's ended some lives. Maybe not by her own hand, but definitely by her own deeds. And as the story progresses, it's really hard to stay unbiased. So I hope that you'll grant me a little bit of grace. I will stick to facts. I won't be hyperbolic and add to things. Okay. But it is heartbreaking. Yeah. And, Veronica Butler was on a high that day. She couldn't wait to see her children. And even that was used against her. Because some of the details that came out in the preliminary hearing were really atrocious and really added to how negatively people will be perceiving Tiffany Adams. So negatively that I'm not even sure she can get a fair trial. But I think that if they keep it in the area where they plan to, right there in Texas County, well, no, that's not the county, I'm sorry. Yeah, maybe it is Texas County, Oklahoma. It is so it is the largest county in the area, but she is so well connected, even though she's from Cimarron, where there's only maybe 2 to 4,000 people in the county where they're trying it. She's very connected. She's been on boards. She's been with elected officials. She's very well connected and feared. And I worry that that's going to interfere with things, especially after how the preliminary hearing went. There's been some manipulations going on in the case that are good and bad. Um, and I can only look at it from my perspective, not being in the courtroom. So I'm listening to several of the reporters who were actually there, or several of those that do true crime that actually were in the courtroom for the preliminary hearing. So this case itself is not available for you to purchase the documents um very easily at all. You can find out when the hearings are, and you can find out the results of hearings in the judge's orders. But Oklahoma has everything kind of sealed off unless you're an attorney or have an attorney affiliation, like as best as I can find. Now, some people do put them on either SoundCloud or Scribe, which I've been able to get, like the indictments were leaked, the original indictments, and we've all gone over those. And I do believe if you go back to the playlist, and one of those videos will have the indictments there for actually what they're all accused of. Okay. We're going to go over everything a little bit uh by and by. I'm not going to break down the charges except for to tell you that they're all charged with murder, with 2 counts of murder. And they're all charged with mishandling of the corpse and of aiding and abetting. And that Tiffany Adams, the grandmother, is also charged with endangering the welfare of children, with like a neglect, because it came out earlier before this hearing, and we talked about it, that she actually had the children with her while she purchased items to use for the planned killing. And yes, I said planned killing because it is very evident that it was premeditated. They planned for a month. They actually made an attempt, or they planned an attempt in February for Veronica Butler's birthday. They very sillily were going to throw a vice at her car. Yeah. Well, they thought she'd go out partying that day or be careless, but she never left her house because she was planning on getting her children back and doing like what normal people do, not crazy, messed up people like the 5 we're going to be talking about. Okay. Yes, Mrs. Cassandra, on February 28th, on her birthday, Tiffany Adams and Cora Trombley had hatched a plan that Tad Cullum and Cora Trombley would throw a vice at her in a moving vehicle and cause a fatal crash accident, which is the stupidest plan I'd ever heard of. Like, I don't even know how that was supposed to work. And then, like, Tiffany Adams ordered them to practice ahead of time with with a bale of hay, which they never got around to doing. I have to say, the more I hear about all of this, the scarier it gets because it's so damn stupid, and yet it worked. They literally brutally carried out their plan. Well, let's get to the story. This is Veronica Butler in Jilian Kelley. Now, Veronica Butler, very young, 2 children she left behind, a family, her father, her brother, and several others. Basically, bearing the hate of the grandmother. The grandmother didn't want her to have her children back, wanted full custody of her children, didn't even want her son to have custody. It came out in the hearing that she had actually attacked her son, threatened him, her and Tad Cullum, her boyfriend, uh, packing guns. He said, "You better come packing because you're not getting these kids." When he said he was coming to get his kids because he had custody of them. Now he has a problem. He has a drug problem, and he's got a couple of arrests under his belt. He's not exactly a good guy, and he's not a good guy. And he's probably not the best father figure, but you would think with the help of his mother, he could do better. But instead, she decided to say, "Nope, keeping the kids. You get the hell out of here. My children." Like, and I understand, a grandmother's love. You may want to keep your kids safe. You may keep the grandchildren safe. But this woman went way too far, in my humble opinion, and I think most of yours. This was way too much. I find myself, for like the 5th time in a week, having to say, when is murder ever the answer to your problems? Like, when has that ever worked for anyone? I mean, how stupid is this that you actually thought murdering people was going to make your life better and solve all your problems? Has that worked for anyone? Do you not watch the news? Do you not got a clue about the real world out here? Where people go to jail for life or get the electric chair? Or, have you not seen what happens to people who decide that murder is the answer? I mean, I don't get it. It's so frustrating. Exactly, Mousy. They're still his children. And more than that, he is still her son. And if she would do that to him, like, God help anybody to cross this woman's path. As far, we talked about this in another stream earlier about their reputation, the reputation of Tiffany Adams and Tad Cullum, who apparently are the evil partners here. Tiffany Adams in full control and Tad Cullum having the skill and the ability to actually plan and execute whatever she wished to be done. They were feared. People said, "Don't cross them, you'll be sorry." They had really extreme beliefs. And that's how people started calling them God's misfits, which was actually a misnomer because, like, that name was like a joke. It was because not religiously that they got together. That God's misfit is a real religious group of, just oddballs just getting together in a good and positive way. It's a Facebook group. And I remember that gentleman being very upset with being associated by name to this case when he had nothing to do with it, because this was a very centralized group of maybe 10 members that had no name. But it started with the Trombleys and the Cooks and Grices. Paul Grice, one of the defendants who's married. And it started on a political level that they felt, there was some issues with government, and they started investigating their so-called individual rights against government. You know what I'm saying here. They got a little out there, and they had a little group, and they decided to talk about it in this group. And the six of them were together, and then there was another couple, and then Tiffany Adams and Tad Cullum joined the group. Okay. And that is when Tiffany Adams met Cora Trombley. Okay. Now, Cora Trombley, if you'll remember from the story, is one of the reasons why they got discovered, because Cora Trombley is a very disturbed woman and decided to tell her 16-year-old daughter all about everything they were doing. Yes, how these people treat their children is absolutely disgusting to me. We got a grandmother who thinks she owns the children and disregards her own son. And then we got another mother who actually plotting against killing people and making big plans with someone, and actually bothers to tell their 16-year-old daughter, a 16-year-old young woman, all about it. As if that's something to brag about. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a parent, and I don't want to be best friends with my 16-year-old daughter to the point that I'm telling her everything I'm doing like that. There's something wrong there. Like, there's something wrong. But what right happened is that 16-year-old knew everything was wrong, and everything that was happening was wrong. It had no problem spilling the beans when asked. And I say kudos to that young woman. That's a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of something good, that perhaps she's not permanently tainted by this damn stepfather and awful mother that she had, or an association with a group of people that were just, well, just wrong. Wrong-headed, wrong thinking, wrongdoing. Wrong's the only word I can think of that's like legitimate for YouTube in how I feel about this crew. Although some decent things, like I said, they come forward. So let's see about bringing some of those forward for you. The first one would be Mr. Paul Geis. Now, Mr. Paul Geis got arrested after the original four, if you'll remember. He actually got pulled in for questioning and told everybody a bunch of lies, perjured himself extremely, to the point that they let him go home so that they could get a warrant, because they knew everything he had just said was a lie, so they could arrest his ass permanently. Now, Paul Geis, he's a troubled man. He's a very troubled man. But when push came to shove, I'd have to say, although he's done some absolutely horrific, horrible things, when it came to testifying and doing the right thing, he did. When he got arrested, he immediately told them everything. He was the first one to waive a preliminary hearing, to waive speedy trial, to plead guilty, and said, yeah, I did it. It was horrible. I did it for all the wrong reasons. I feel duped, but I did do it, because he is one of the ones responsible for the killing. By his own words, he's the one who killed Veronica Butler, who was stabbed 30 times. He talked about, and this is from the preliminary hearing, he talked about Veronica Butler being subdued, that how they got them out of the car. And this was from Cora Trombley, because Cora and Paul both testified at the preliminary hearing. And I don't want to go into too much details, but this part is important. He even felt guilt and remorse over the fact that they enticed Veronica Butler out of the vehicle to get the children by telling them they were inside the trailer that they had brought to the meeting, petting a calf, a baby calf. And of course, Veronica wanting to see her children happy, the thought of a baby animal and her kids being overjoyed, she didn't want to pull them away from such a thing. She got out of the vehicle, and so did Jilian, and they went towards the trailer. And this is how they became available to all the misdeeds of the rest of them. But back to Paul. Paul pled guilty back in September. And the only thing that he got in the deal was that there would be no death penalty, because Oklahoma's a death penalty state. And, take it for what it is. I'm kind of happy about that. You might be too after you hear the details of what happened. He also agreed to testify at all the proceedings in this preliminary hearing that was happening, which was at the time originally scheduled for all of them. And Paul was the first one to say, nope, I don't need a preliminary hearing. I'm guilty. I plead. I will tell you everything. This isn't right. Now, Paul is married. His wife didn't know anything about the plot, but he told his wife about the murder after it was done. And I truly think that his relationship with his wife is why he's coming clean. I think he's had a troubled past. I think the issue of children was used against him because he seemed to react very, very strongly anytime children being abused or mistreated in any way gets brought up. Now, that's just speculation, I understand. But I'm trying to understand how they got sucked in to this plot that Tiffany Adams, who is the one who initiated it, because like I said, they all just met in this group, before. And Tiffany Adams was trying to get custody of the kids and making up lies. And she had already made up the lie about the children being assaulted, mistreated by a relative of Veronica Butler's without any evidence or proof. But, here's the thing. I know the court has to do what they have to do, and you do too. We are all glad that the court, even on a rumor that those children were being mistreated, stepped in and just allowed supervised visitation all around, found them a safe place to be with family while they checked it out. Because you don't want to leave the children where they could be harmed while things are being checked out. Because just as much as it could be a false story, it could be the truth. And it's not up to them to decide when they get a report whether it's true or not. It's up to them to protect the children and investigate. And that's the order it should be. Protect the children first, investigate after. And that's what they did. And although that wasn't fair to Veronica Butler, because there's never been any evidence that anything happened, you can't really blame the court for what they did. Although it did add to the situation because it emboldened Tiffany Adams, at least until the investigation was done and a judge started siding with Veronica and she was going to get custody back. And this really angered Tiffany Adams because now all her cards were played and there was nothing else for her to do. So she met Cora Trombley in this group of, I won't say God's misfits, but we will call them misfits. And they bonded because Cora Trombley also had an addicted stepson and who had lost his life actually. And Tiffany was talking to her and bonding with her over the troubles she had with Wrangler, his drug addiction and his bouts with the law and the problems. So they bonded together. And Tiffany confided in Cora that the children were at risk and that she didn't have money to fight in court anymore. But those children were being abused and she had evidence and she knew it to be true. And Cora believed her without seeing anything, without even asking if she really pressed a report. For some reason, Cora just believed her. Well, she's not the only one. Because Tiffany and Cora are the ones that decided that something needed to be done. And Tiffany put forth that they were going to have to handle Veronica Butler. And that handling meant end her. End her interference and her control of the children in her life. That was her solution. And she convinced quite a few of them to go along with her. When I say quite a few, well, I definitely mean Cora. Now, Cora was one of the ones, she told her daughter all about it. So she was originally arrested with the all four of them, which would be both Twombly's in Tiffany Adams in Ted Cullum, all on the 13th of April. Now, come October, after Paul Grice decides to waive preliminary hearing and waive speedy trial and plead guilty, Cora Twombly, after speaking with the authorities for a while, well, she did the same. And she pled guilty and she got a plea deal. She needs to testify at all the proceedings. She needs to testify against everybody. Now, there won't be a trial for Paul Grice. He's pled guilty. He's going to be arraigned and sentenced, and he's going to testify. And the same thing with Cora. There won't be a trial. There'll be an arraignment hearing and a sentencing because she pled guilty to first-degree murder and the conspiracy and the mishandling of the bodies, the moving of bodies across state line, all of it. She pled guilty. And the only thing she got was a suspended life sentence. Now, it's when we read what they wrote, it says suspended life in 30 years because she could have got life plus 30 years for all of the offenses. So what they did is suspend the life and they gave her 30 years. I don't know if she'll get probation or not. I hope not. Because once I go through the testimony and what she told the court, I don't think you're going to have much sympathy for Mrs. Cora Twombly. She's just a younger version of Tiffany Adams without all the clout, as far as I can tell. She sat on that witness stand with no remorse, no regret. Witnesses said she rolled her eyes and made clucking noises like she couldn't be bothered. And at one point tried to bring herself to tears and failed. That the only time she ever showed emotion was when her daughter was brought up. And I think that that's the only time she felt shame. Because wouldn't you? She told her 16-year-old daughter everything she did as if it was nothing. And her daughter did the right thing. Her daughter told. The only time she had tears was when that came up. And she should have shame. And I think she pled to keep her daughter out of it. I think she pled so her daughter didn't have to do what she has to do now on the stand. We'll see if the daughter comes in. But in the preliminary hearing, the daughter did not have to testify at all. And I think that might be, although it's not written, so I can't say for sure, but it makes sense to me that that was part of the plea deal for Cora Twombly. Because when it comes to information, Cora Twombly knows it all. She knows it all. She was there from the very beginning with Tiffany Adams, planning every single detail. In the beginning, when we got the indictments, even the state thought that her husband had more to do with it than she did. And they were actually looking at the husband stronger than they were her. What actually came out was that it was more her than the husband. He wasn't brought into it till the very end. Cole Twombly had a reputation of drinking a little too much and talking a little too much. And Tiffany Adams and Tad Cullen didn't think he could be trusted. And Cora agreed. And he was only brought in 5 days before the actual event, the actual killing, as a lookout. And when we find out the details of what happened, he had very little to do with it. He did aid and abet, and he's just as guilty because he knew about the conspiracy to kill them, and he knew it was going to happen. So under the terms of first-degree murder, that definitely applies. So he's just as guilty, and he can get life. the same as the rest, although he didn't lay hands on anyone. Anyway, Cora Trombley did testify in the preliminary hearing, and we'll go over the details in a little bit. Well, her arraignment for her plea deal and what will happen to her in finality, because it still does have to get accepted by the court, will be on February 19th. The same as Paul, I do believe. Yep, February 19th. They'll both be there together in court for this. Well, we'll be hearing a lot of them during all the other proceedings to testify on the other two trials. All three trials, it depends. Because, the state pressed to have them all go through the preliminary hearing together. But one by one, they all just dropped out. Because even Tiffany Adams, the day of the preliminary hearing, her attorney walked in and she was in there. And rather than go through the proceeding of the preliminary hearing, she waived the hearing in speedy trial, as if to give a big FU to the family. Like, you don't get to sit here and watch me go through this. I'm out. And she walked out, and her attorney stayed, and no hearing, no preliminary hearing. Now, Tiffany Adams is also the one, when arrested, who gave a pre-recorded statement to the courts, to law enforcement, about everything. But we didn't hear anything about a plea deal. Now, just because she waived a preliminary hearing and waived a speedy trial doesn't mean anything. She could still say not guilty and just go to trial. She doesn't have a plea on the table that we know of. But we don't know if she's negotiating with the prosecution or not. But after we heard most of the testimony, I'm not so sure the prosecution is going to be negotiating that well with her. It depends on the kind of evidence that she has or what she can offer. She is the one that conspired. It was her idea. She brought them all together to do it. But, did she stab Veronica Butler 30 times? No. Paul Geist did that. She may have lured her there. She may have got her into the trailer. She may have even got her with the stun gun, because I do believe there's some evidence of that. Veronica Butler's autopsy said that she was stabbed 30 times. But she also had stun gun burns on her neck and her back, and that she had blunt trauma to her head, where it said that she was hit with a hammer. I'm not sure if Tiffany and Tad did that when they were trying to incapacitate her. Okay. But Veronica Butler also had extensive wounds that showed she fought back. She fought back a lot. In Cora Trombley's testimony at the preliminary hearing, stated that she could see Veronica fighting with Paul and trying to get away. Okay, and that Tiffany was asking for help. And Cora Trombley helped. She walked over and gave Tiffany a stun gun to help immobilize her so that Paul could do it. And then she said that she saw from a distance, as she walked away, Paul doing an action like stabbing her, but you couldn't tell if it was actually stabbing because she never saw the weapon. But the act was there, and Paul does admit to it. So it's pretty clear that he was responsible for the stabbing. But the actual other wounds and getting her incapacitated or into a position to be killed, that's all Tiffany Adams and Tad Cullum. Okay, so she's evil. There's no other word. I don't know what's wrong with her, but she does seem quite entitled to have no rules if she thinks they need to be broken to accomplish what she needs to. She seems to be willing to do it. Horrifically so. To disregard this young woman's life. you know. Eh, But anyway, she was not part of the preliminary hearing anymore. And so a lot of the frustration from those listening into the preliminary hearing, those in the courtroom against prosecution, there was a lot of feedback saying the prosecution didn't really push Corey Trombley that hard about information about Tiffany Adams and what actually happened. But here's the thing. Why would they? Because she's no longer part of the preliminary hearing. The judge no longer needs to hear the evidence against her to decide if they're going to trial. She's going to trial. She waived. She's going to trial. It's moot. And so they had to regroup. And I really think when I look at it, I think maybe they just were a little unsettled too, because nobody knew ahead of time that Tiffany Adams was going to be doing this. She literally waited till the day of the preliminary hearing. And there is reporting from the courtroom that even her own attorneys didn't act like they knew it was going to happen. Like they did have paperwork with them that they could give the judge, but I don't think they were sure that that's what she was going to do. It seemed to be like a last minute kind of thing. And normally there's a lot of thinking that goes into all of that. I'm pretty sure she knew what she was going to do, but yeah, as evil as I think she is, I think she did it on purpose to unsettle everyone, to purposely unsettle those that were testifying against who's left in the preliminary hearing, which is Cole Twombly and Tad Cullum. But I'll tell you who didn't know was Tad Cullum, because more than one source reported that he flushed so red and looked so angry and so just like, well, he didn't take to it kindly. They said his eyes were black, his face got flushed, that in his neck they could see his veins bulging. That's how annoyed he was. They also said he looks like a man you never want to see angry. He looks violent, just in appearance. And that's his girlfriend. That's the woman he put his life on the line for to do her bidding. And he didn't know what she was going to do either. And he, I guess, maybe feels betrayed. But I say, good for you. But it was rough. Not that I feel sorry for Ted Cullum, not in the least. It's just more evidence of Tiffany Adams just being manipulative and controlling and very self-serving. So we get to Cole Twombly. This is Cora's husband. And well, he's part of the preliminary hearing. And he was also arrested with the original group in April. And had been pretty quiet about everything. Nothing from his attorneys or everything. He's going forward. He didn't waive. He didn't plea. So at the preliminary hearing, he sits through the testimony there. And by the way, they're all wearing bulletproof vests and they're shackled. And each one of the defense attorneys had approached the judge and asked if their client could be unshackled while this was going on. And they're like, no way. No. A resounding no to every single one of them. Absolutely not. Well, Cole Twombly and his attorneys, they approached the first day and listened to the testimony and all, and they approached the witness to Cora and pushed back a little bit on little things, not really much. Just basically going over the basic information. A lot of it he didn't even know about. It might have bothered him a little bit to hear that he wasn't trusted and it had all been going on for weeks before he even knew about it. Well, Cole didn't really have a lot to do with it. In the preliminary testimony, Cora and Paul both reiterated that Cole was brought in late because, he drank and he ran his mouth and he wasn't trusted. But they needed a lookout because they need one for the north and one for the south. Because remember where this happened at Four Corners. It's pretty desolate, but there is actually roads coming in all directions. And you never know when someone's going to come by. Now, you could see them from far away, so they would have plenty of time to react, but you need a lookout. You need lookouts to get that warning there as soon as possible. So They actually brought him in late, and the only thing he did was the lookout. And then he brought clean clothes and different phones to Paul and Tad when they went to the disposal site on the farm to dispose of the bodies. And then he drove one of their vehicles away. That was his contribution to all of it. But he knew about it, and he helped, listen to them plan. And he didn't report it ahead of time, so first-degree murder is definitely still there for him. Premeditation. He still gets the disposing of the body because he went to the site. He contributed. They're all in illegal, So he goes through the whole first day listening to all this. And then they come back the second day when they're going to have more testimony from Paul Grice. And he all of a sudden, his lawyer goes up to the judge and he waives the rest of the preliminary hearing. He says, nope, you don't have to decide if there's enough evidence there against me to go to trial. I'll take trial. I waive speedy trial. I'm done. I waive. I'm finished. He has a hearing in May on the 7th. Now, I don't know if he has anything to offer. He could make a plea deal in just to cut the expenses and the turmoil of going through a trial. If he feels remorse, if he feels regret about his participation, he could make a plea deal and he could just, cut his losses and start serving his time. Right now, he's sitting in jail like the rest of them with no bail and waiting. Not a single person is getting bail in regards to this case. Absolutely not. The way they organized the actual violence of the whole thing, there's no way they were getting out into the public until this is decided. They were a danger to everyone. There would be a danger to witnesses. There would be a danger to the community in itself. Maybe even the rest of the family. Who knew? They don't want them anywhere near the children. So, all right. So he waived, and that was like a minor part of what he did. His defense attorney did get to question Cora and did get to question Paul, but not really much came out except for that Cole Twombly didn't kill anybody. Maybe his inactions contributed to that killing, but he didn't lay hands, so to speak. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't stab. He didn't do it. But he's going to go down with the rest of them just the same. So now we get to the big cheese here, Tad Cullum, who by all accounts, both Cora and Paul, he testified that Tad Cullum is the one with the physical plan, with the execution. Him and Tiffany, Tiffany's the one is, I need it done. Let's organize. We got to get it done. This is who goes in on it. Tad is the one professing expertise, so to speak, in the organizing and like disposing of the bodies and how we do it in the logistics. Like he's the logistic kingpin, so to speak. He was also arrested with the rest of them. And this preliminary hearing was mostly focused on him and what he did, because he's the only one left now, after we went through the other ones, that the judge needs to decide if there's enough evidence to go to trial, because that's what a preliminary hearing is for. It's for the state to bring forward some of their evidence to show to the court, to the justice system, that yes, there's enough here against him that a reasonable person would be able to decide by jury, guilty or not guilty. Like there's enough here to let a jury decide. Okay. We heard a lot of stuff about Tad. We heard brutalities of the murders. Okay. Well, Tad Cullum's defense attorney, very rightly so, kind of found a lot of loopholes to push back on. But Judge Jett still wants it to go to the jury. Now he's going to go for, because he's fast-tracked, he didn't give up his right to a speedy trial. So you only have so many days. April 13th was his arrest. His I believe his arraignment was it August or September? So they have to start setting a trial date. So he has a hearing next week, actually, on the 7th, and we'll get the date for the trial and all of that. Like, he's going to be fast. He will be the first one to be fast tracked by trial. If Cole does go to trial, if Tiffany does go to trial, they will be after Tad. Okay. They won't all be tried together because of how they're waiving. All right. We know there'll be no trial for Paul or Cora because they pled guilty. That's it. They're done. It's just going to be sentencing. Now, I'm going to switch over my view because now I'm just going to talk to you. No pretty files. And I'm going to talk to you about the testimony now because we kind of know the result. And I'm going to go by, there's a lovely young lady on Twitter, and she has a YouTube channel called Pop Crime. She does like popular cases, like celebrity cases usually, but this one really got her. And she went to the court and she sat in the courtroom. And because of how diligent she was and how compassionate and how it really affected her, I chose to use her interpretations of what happened in the courtroom to bring forward to you guys because I actually think they were the most honest and close to how you or I would feel if we were in that courtroom, if that makes sense. Like, they weren't full of like legal, we can, being a lawyer or being a journalist, you see so much, you could be a little jaded, you could be a little hardened. Her take on it was so raw and so like unfamiliar to this kind of thing happening that it just struck me as so honest and clear. And so we're gonna go on that. So on the first day, she said that there were shocking details about the case. First of all, Jilian Kelley was stabbed like 16 times, and she also had stun burns on her. And well, Cora talked a lot that first day about how they got together, how they all were admiring David Strait, and they were actually modeling themselves after the sovereign citizen guru. And like, they had an obsession with the American state of nationalism, going over there, like, you know what I'm talking about here. I don't want to knock anybody's belief, but basically they don't think that some of the laws that are made by the state actually govern them. That only the Constitution does, and that no state can make a law to govern against them in any other way. And they want to strip it down like that. It's basically a matter, when I look at it, it's a way not to pay taxes or do your fair share. It's a way to be a selfish, if you know what I mean, like in America. But they call it some kind of renewed patriotism to the way things should be. But I remind you that the founding fathers paid tax. The founding fathers believed in all the states being able to take care of their people. And they also believed in the fact that you had to do things together to get anything done and not just be like little rebels against everything, Well, Cora started the testimony on the first day, and she sat in that stand. And like I said, she was not perceived as very emotional or remorseful. She talked about how she got to know Tiffany Adams through loss because her stepson Frank um, was 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 married to the Cooks, who was another couple in the group's eldest daughter, and he had issues. Um, the God Misfits thing was just a joke. Like, really, it was just that nobody wanted them and they had to start their own thing. It's because she said, quote unquote, they didn't fit in anywhere. So it was like Lacey and Barrett Cook and, you know, uh, Cora in Cole Twombly, and it was Paul Geist and his wife. I don't know the name of the other couple, but then, like I said before, Tiffany Adams and Ted Cullum joined. You know, um, they were all taken aback when Tiffany Adams' attorney, Mitchell Solomon, like showed up and kind of stunned everybody. Uh, with Adams actually, waiving the preliminary hearing. They kind of had like rumors, going on whether she might be working on her own plea deal against the others, or if she was actually just trying to protect herself, or giving the big fu, like I said, to the family. Quite a few people there in the courtroom thought she was. And I will say that it was a very emotional courtroom by all accounts. Not only Lawrence, but several people that were there said that the families were there, that there was a lot of muttering, a lot of carrying on. And when certain parts of the story were told, there was loud utterances to where the judge had to remind everybody to, stop because they would have to leave. But it was very emotional for everybody, and he did the best. He did let some murmuring go on. I do believe that Judge Jett did realize how emotionally charged these murders are and how the community feels in the family. And I think he did his best to balance it the way he could. Um, but when when Tiffany Adams' attorney did talk about her waiving, um, it was noted by quite a few that reported on it. Like I said, that Tad Cullum seemed shocked that his romantic partner, like he didn't know anything about this. The attorneys didn't even talk to each other. Nick turned red and his veins bulged. And Miss Collin actually says she tried to lock eyes with him to look at him one part during the morning. And then she had to quickly look away because his eyes are just black and scary. And she was stunned that she was in the room with alleged murderers. Like it really hit her looking at him like that in his eyes. It was very unsettling. She also said he's very large. He's a much larger in person. He's a very large, impressed person, built. The first witness, of course, was Cora Trombley. And the district attorney of the day was George Buddy Leach. And he's gotten a lot of criticism for being kind of soft on Cora. Okay. Cora, like I said, was testifying in exchange for a recommendation of a significantly lesser charge, reduced sentence, so to speak, life being removed and getting 30 years, you know. She got no charges for the unlawful desecration or the disposal of the body. She got 30 years for the murder she could have got another 10 years for the conspiracy. Well, it was reported that she got a life sentence with 30 years suspended, but it's actually the opposite from what I saw. Like, I got to go with the majority. So it could be either way. We'll say this. It could be either a life sentence with 30 years taken off, or it's the life sentence suspended with a guaranteed 30 years, no parole, and no other charges. Um, I saw more reporting on the latter. The life sentence part was suspended and she got the 30 years with no parole. But we'll see. Either way, she would be young enough to get out, and I wasn't really comfortable with that. She has good behavior and all. They said if she did get the life sentence, if they took 30 years off of it, she could serve 40 with good. So she's either there for 30 years guaranteed no parole or 40 out with good um behavior. Either way, it seems kind of short for both of their lives and for what she did. Anyway, there was a lot of disruption in the court in regards to that, and there's a lot of pushback in the media in regards to DA Leach even giving her such a deal, especially when they heard the testimony in which she said happened. That they contrived to murder Veronica on more than one occasion, and she was a main part of that both times. That she helped Tiffany Adams from the start, that she's the one who bought burner phones, that she contributed by during the altercation giving people stun guns to help fight back and being the lookout. Overall, she showed no remorse. It's just she felt righteous in Tiffany Adams' claim of what was happening to those children. And for some reason, she feels like they were doing the right thing without any evidence that anything was happening to those children or that Veronica Butler was a bad person. Just going by Tiffany's words. She didn't even flinch when she was asked, well, what of Jilian Kelley? And they said, well, we didn't know she was who it was going to be until the day before. And Tiffany Adams had said to Cora, well, it doesn't matter because if you help Veronica Butler, you're helping and you get no leniency. And it was collateral damage. Collateral damage because she chose to be a good person, to help other parents get back together with their children, to be a court appointed supervisor of visits, to help people get back together and to do the right thing. And Tiffany Adams said, her fault. She went with Veronica. She chose. Just plain evil. She repeated that they made this plan because the Butler children were abused and that Veronica was letting it happen. And then, according to Cora, and of course Tiffany Adams, with no evidence of the same, Veronica Butler needed to die. And therefore, Jilian Kelley, who was helping her see these children, needed to die too, because she just happened to be there. Cora is also the one who testified about the disagreement that Tiffany had with her own son, in that Tiffany Adams was the one who set up Wrangler Rickham to lose custody of his own children so that she could have them. When Wrangler and his girlfriend of the time wanted to come and pick up the children, they let the Tiffany know, and Tiffany Adams and Tad Cullum called their anti-government crew over, armed. And when Rickman showed up, he was met by Cullum and Twombly and Grice and a crew with all types of pistols and AR-15s, and Rickman was told to leave without his children. And a few months later, he was coincidentally arrested on a weapons charge after a felony and turned in by his own mother and boyfriend, Tad Cullum, to get him out of the way. And like I said before, Cora testified that Tiffany Adams approached her by saying that she could not afford the ongoing custody battle anymore. over the Butler children. And like I said, they planned on throwing a vice at her on her birthday uh, through a car window. She was supposed to die, but Veronica Butler didn't cooperate with that plan and never left the house. Okay. After that, it was full force with Tiffany and Cora planning the rest, and Tad Cullum taking the lead on how to execute the plan. Tiffany went out of her way to convince both Cora and Tad that it needed to be done. Well, that plan kind of fell apart. They went on with the next. In the beginning of March, Adams pulled Paul Grice and Tad Cullum into a scheme to kill Butler in a different way. Cora was already in. She was convinced that Veronica Butler needed to die because the children were being abused. Paul Grice testifies he was easily convinced because the thought of it, Tiffany saying what is happening to the children and nobody wanted to protect them. Never asked to see any evidence. They often said they had a manuscript in a safe somewhere that proved everything, that they had all the evidence, but they never bothered to show it to anyone. Adams used manipulation, the abuse of the children, and often repeated lots of scripture to them as to why this was the right thing to do. She was on a full press to manipulate them and convince them that this was the thing to do. And it did convince Paul Grice. He admits it. But Paul said the only reason he even thought about it was because of the children were being abused. Grice testified that Tiffany Adams played on his traumatic childhood because his father was physically abusive, and also his strong desire to protect all children in his beliefs. He also admitted that he lied to the group, that he had told them he was tougher than he was. He said he had killed somebody before, although he never had, which was why they probably expected him to take the lead and do the actual killing. He said that he was part of a mercenary group that took out children abusers of all type, and Tiffany used this lie of his to further manipulate him, that these children deserved his talent to accomplish this deed. It's kind of sad to hear from both Grice and Cora that Tiffany Adams kept referring to Jilian Kelley as a nobody. Because all through this testimony, we find out what happened to Veronica Butler, that she fought back. We know who actually killed her. Paul Grice admits to all of the stab wounds. We know the stun gun was Tad and Tiffany. We're not sure who hit her in the head with the hammer. And we're pretty sure it was Tad Cullum because Paul Grice identified him as having a weapon as a hammer at the time. He was the only one seen with a hammer that either Paul or Cora could testify to. So the problem is that Jilian Kelley also had multiple stab wounds. But Paul doesn't admit to how she was actually stabbed so many times. He does admit during his testimony on the second day to stabbing her because he saw her eyes flutter in. He became concerned that she would be buried alive when he saw the fluttering. And he was pushed on this, by Tad Cullum's defense attorney and by the DA, if he'd ever seen, he'd never seen a person die before, but he said he saw animals and they do flutter, but it didn't register to him that way. He does admit to stabbing her 2, maybe 3 times, But Jillian Kelley had 16 stab wounds at least, multiple taser, the taser wounds again to her neck and her back. Ted Collins' defense attorney chose this moment to decide that he's not guilty of killing anybody. Nobody saw him kill anyone. It was Paul Grice. It was all Paul Grice. Well, that's not going to matter because he helped plan it, because there were more witnesses that came forward. So while the defense attorneys for everybody else were attacking Paul Grice because he is being honest on there, and here's what I want to make clear. Everyone in that courtroom who was reporting on the testimony said Cora Trombley had no remorse whatsoever, but Paul Grice approached it with honesty, believability, remorse, regret. He knows he did wrong. He feels terrible. When pressed by Tad Collins' defense attorney that Paul was sitting on the stand lying, because remember, he did lie in 2 previous statements to the law enforcement before he was arrested. That's how he got arrested. He perjured himself twice. So, of course, a good defense attorney is going to come up and say, hey, you lied then. What makes us think we should believe you now? Why would you lie? You could be lying to save your own skin. You could be lying just to get away with this. You're lying to save your own skin, he said. And Paul Grice looked right back at him. He said, no, my skin's not worth saving. That's the statement that makes me want to believe what he's saying. That he is trying to give closure to the families and telling everything the best that he can. Because they deserve it. Because he knows what happened was wrong. And he feels duped. And he knows he should have asked for evidence before believing anything happened to those children. He knows it now. He sees the evil. And he knows he played a big part of it and he acted evil himself. That statement to me was a man that was remorseful. He acted like he had a conscience or that he found it. And so I don't feel sorry for him that he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison and not see his wife, not have a relationship with his wife or whatever. I don't know where they are. But I think he's trying to do the right thing. That's all we can ask of anybody in this situation. And I just wish he could say more about what happened to Jillian Kelley, because the family still doesn't have an answer as to how she actually died, who did what. Because remember, Paul was over here stabbing Veronica Butler 30 times. He kind of didn't see what they were doing over there. Well, here's what we do know. We know who was over there. Tad Collins and Tiffany Adams. Cora was far enough away to see some of what was going on, but not inside the trailer. And Cole was the lookout, way too far away. We know whatever happened to Jillian Kelley, the 2 people who know the most are Tiffany Adams and Tad Collins. They can try to blame it on Paul Grice all they want, but he's already admitting to what he did with Veronica Butler. Why wouldn't he admit everything he did with Jillian Kelley if he did it? It doesn't make any sense. Regret doesn't help. I get it. But it does go in the right direction, So in this whole plan, one of the most absurd things that came out that really kind of bothered me was they actually decided not to use guns because it would be too messy. And I'm like, what? Like, you used knives. Well, here's the fact. Neither Cora nor Paul could say that they had any discussions on how they would kill them. They knew how they would lead them into the trailer. They knew how they would get to them. They knew what they were going to do with the bodies afterwards, but they never really discussed how the killings would happen. They were leaving that up to Tad and Paul. And that's when the courtroom started to get curious. Because the big question is, why didn't the district attorney push Cora on that? All the conversations she had with Tiffany. She was there from the start with the planning. Why didn't they push more on what conversations about how the killing was planned so that the family could get some idea of what happened to Jilian? The DA didn't ask. I don't know if it's because Tiffany Adams was no longer part of the preliminary hearing, but Tad Cullum was. I don't know if he was just off his game. Well, the second chair for DA did better when it came to Paul Grice and the rest of the details, especially about Veronica Butler. And she did try to push a little bit on Jilian Kelley, but he stuck to his story that he did not do all of those stab wounds. He did it after he found her bleeding, slumped in the corner in the trailer, already stabbed. And he was putting her, I guess, what he thought, out of her misery. He did not want her buried alive. The testimony went on, and Paul Grice gave great detail. Actually, Cora gave the first details about Veronica Butler fighting so ferociously for her life. Because as I said, when she pulled up to where they were coming, she heard Paul screaming for help, that he was having trouble subduing her. And that's when she ran over and she gave the stun gun to Tiffany and helped that way. And then she retreated. But again, the DA didn't follow up with, and then what happened? He never had her say Tiffany Adams used the stun gun on her or Tad Cullum hit her. He never pushed her on any of that. It was only Grice that actually gave the rest of the details, like about the stabbing, Paul. He didn't amplify the brutality of this crime. He just moved on. In many of the courtroom murmured, and it was noted by several of the people who were in the room at the time and are reporting about it afterwards. Maybe it'll come out in the rest of the trial, but it did make everyone question what was actually going on here and how connected Leach is. He knows all of the defendants, by the way. It's a small county. I think I said that before. It kind of leads to my questioning on how far they're willing to go. But then again, they're not going to get away with murder. Paul Grice is said to look very young in person, which kind of added to his believability when telling the story. He's actually like 32 years old, but everybody said he looks like a teenager. It was Tayo Smith, the second chair DA, who did the questioning with Grice, which got more of the story out. Actually, I have to correct the hammer thing because in reviewing my notes, Paul Grice did admit to hitting Veronica Butler in the head with the hammer because he was the one that was inside the trailer, crouched, waiting for them to come inside. And when Butler peeked in, he struck her on the right side of the head with the hammer, which caused that injury. And Butler is the one who started fighting back with Ghost, and she actually managed to tase Grice a few times, leaving his arm temporarily numb and unable to maneuver, which is when she ran out of the trailer, which is what Cora saw, her running away from the trailer and Paul running after her, tackling her, and her fighting like hell for her life, which caused all the defensive wounds that she had. And that's when Grice was yelling for help and when Cora came and gave him a stun gun. Adams was there. She handed the stun gun to Adams. The most horrible part of everything that I read from more than one account, and especially from Laura Collins, um, was that when Grice finally subdued Butler after 30 stab wounds and the struggling was gone, Tiffany Adams circled around, maniacally laughing, and Paul Grice testified that it was one of the most evil things he'd ever heard. The audible gasps in the courtroom, one of the family members actually calling out Tiffany Adams is a bitch, and I'd have to say, yep. And that's when George Jett had to tell everybody to get in line. But can you blame them? That woman laughed like a crazy psychotic. She laughed. To me, that told me everything I needed to know about her. She didn't care about those children. Those children were a possession to her. She's not doing it to do the right thing. Death is, murder is never the answer anyway. But you walk around the body and maniacally laugh like you won something. It was heartbreaking. Hey Liz, no one involved with the murder admitted to any kind of drug addiction or anything like that. Drugs did come up in the trial about Tiffany Adams' son, of course, and Cora Twombly's relationship with her stepson and his use of drugs. Drinking came up with Cole Twombly. But the rest of the testimony, that was kind of hard to take. So I want to move on to other testimony that happened during the hearing because I want to finish up with all of the information for you guys. We had more than just Cora in Paul Grice testify. We also had employees of Walmart, employees of the feed store, employees of the communication store where the phones were bought, tasers were bought, things of this nature. We also had the person who owned the land. Jamie Beasley testified. Now, that's the person that Tad Cullum made arrangements with. Tiffany and Tad Cullums had a meeting with him days before, offering to do some work on the land. They were going to bring a skidder there, which is something that moves large things on and can pull up large amount of dirt. They needed a reason to be on the property because they were going to dispose the bodies there. That was part of the plan. So they had talked to Jamie Beasley, and he had a relationship with him. And the more he talked, to them, the more nervous he got about it. And then the next day, when they were supposed to have done the work, and he noticed none of the work was done, like he knew something was wrong. And there was this man was on the witness stand, and you could tell, several people noted that he has regret too, because he kind of got a feeling something was wrong and he didn't say anything. Because he's a single dad with 2 kids and he was afraid of retaliation. And to be honest, he said he knew that something would happen to him. I really can't blame him. Tad Cullum and Tiffany Adams seem to be cold-blooded psychopaths. They already had the reputation that everybody should fear them, that it was their way or the highway, like you didn't cross them. They were their own kind of justice in the county. Hmm. He testified, to all of that. He also testified to them being on the property. That is where the bodies were found, in the freezer. Cora testified that that was the plan all along, and that they were going to do that. Paul testified that he and Ted Cullum uh, are the ones that transported the bodies, got them there in the freezer to bury them. There was another moment that isn't really put out there that much, but on the witness stand, um, the one time that DA Leach actually pushed back on Cora Twombly was when, being questioned, she had said that Tiffany Adams had told her that the court wouldn't prosecute the sexual abuse allegations against Butler's children, that they didn't care. And that was when, DA Leach actually did have a little passion. He pushed back. He said, "Did you ever see any report? Is there any evidence that was ever reported to our court?" Because no such allegations were ever filed in Oklahoma. They were filed in Kansas, of course, where Butler lives, because they didn't want Veronica Butler, to have custody. He clearly came forward with passion to defend his own office. But most of the courtroom wanted to know why he didn't have the same passion for the families that want justice sitting in that courtroom. I realize he needs to make deals, but he has his deal with Cora and Paul. No reason not to let Cora squirm a little on that witness stand. She's already made her plea. It's in her best interest to keep it. Hopefully, he's just waiting for the trial. Hopefully, he hears a lot of the pushback. And he does get more of the details out so that the family, he doesn't want to hurt the family, but the family needs answers. And without having a clear picture of what happened, we're not sure that Tad Cullum and Tiffany Adams are actually going to be guilty. We know they are. There's enough circumstantial evidence in the testimony, and I do believe a jury will find them guilty. But we want to know exactly what they're guilty of. People need to be able to look at them and say they're evil, because they are. So I understand the frustration of the family. Another curious thing with the family, and not so curious because I actually think they're good people. They actually don't want Tad Cullum or Tiffany Adams to get the death penalty. They say it's not going to help anything, and they don't believe in the death penalty. And they put that to the prosecution already, just so you know. So they did say that after Paul had already negotiated to get the death penalty out of his sentencing, that did work out. Anyway, the testimony just showed how cold-blooded everything was. The most important thing to take away, well, again, they just want to reiterate that Paul Grice's testimony of how he felt duped and all. And that, Ted Cullum's attorney, Miss Miskell, she pushed back really hard that perhaps Paul Grice was just like telling it in such a way to make him look better as far as Jilian Kelley was concerned. Because Paul Grice said he didn't see Ted Cullum with a knife, only with a hammer. But then Paul Grice is the one who actually hit Veronica Butler with the hammer. And I guess he's just assuming that the hammer was left there for Ted. But he does say he saw him with it. Remember that Ted Cullum is the one who rented the property from Jamie Beasley, who testified and made the arrangements to be on the property and to use the digger and things of that nature to create a reason for them being there or for the land to be disturbed. The DA did ask Mr. Beasley about drugs. That's another time drugs came up because he did ask him because it may become part of the pushback from Tad Column's defense attorneys if he had ever done meth before, and Beasley said yes. Quite honestly, he had tried it, but it had been quite a while, and it was part of the reason he didn't come forward. He has two boys. He's a single father, and he was worried. For Paul Grice, he admitted to not being truthful in his first interviews with the detectives, and he actually told them all what part he lied about and what he didn't, and he straightened all out. But Cullum's lawyer, of course, is pushing on that. Like I said, she said, you're just testifying against Ted to save your skin. And like I said, he said his skin wasn't worth saving. A true man with remorse there. I'd like to just say that although I'm giving you all the facts, I've also put a lot of opinion in there. I realize that. And I want you all to make up your own minds. I wish I could give you court documents, but they're not. I could just tell you what they said. I am going to give you this readout from Laura that she did from her personal perspective. And like I said, this is the first time she's had anything like this. And so I think it's a very honest layman's view of what was going on in that courtroom. I think it's as if you or I were there looking, like the average person that watches this true crime. Well, I'm going to go and look for any questions, and then I'm going to wrap up. Hi, Liz. Oh, yes. I did give a little bit of the case history, not very much, but I also have a playlist in the description of the other 3 videos that are time-stamped to this case, the Kansas moms. If you need to catch up from the beginning of everything that's been happening. It is a horrible case. Yes, Liz, it was the 16-year-old daughter of Cora that did, because Cora Twombly, she actually told her daughter everything. Yep. Yep, Charlotte, I heard that the father was very adamant about none of it. At one point, there was a rumor from Tiffany that it was Veronica's brother, and stuff like that. And then something that Veronica he did. There was never any evidence of it at all. As a matter of fact, the court found out that like the incidents she was talking about, they don't match to date and time where Veronica Butler even had access to the children. But they had such a contentious relationship. Of course, there were plenty of arguments between Veronica Butler and Tiffany Adams. Many things were said back and forth, I'm sure, but nothing that involved the children. They must have known that someone else would be there to drive her. And this is true. That's one of the heartbreaking parts of the story, Liam. The fact that Tiffany Adams referred to the supervised visitor, the supervisor that would be coming along as a nobody, as collateral damage, is because they were assisting Veronica, they would deserve anything that happened. It was heartbreaking. It's horrible for the family to have to hear that. Mhm. Yes, there was something. They think that may have been that. That's another thing. We're not sure why there was blood there by the car, but almost all of the altercation happened right there in the dirt, Charla. So I don't think it happened first. The blood got on the car after she left, after she got out of the trailer. Like she never really got all the way in when they went to attack her, when Paul attacked her at the door of the trailer. Um, she ran back that way because Cora admits to walking back to the scene and covering up the blood that was everywhere with the dirt. And that's why they didn't see it. They just saw some on the car. And her glasses, remember? They found her glasses in one part of blood that perhaps Cora had missed. But Cora admits to walking back after they were moving the bodies into the trailer, and Cora went up and was kicking the dirt around to cover all of the blood that was spilled during the altercation with Paul and Veronica Butler. He will at trial. They only have to be sufficient if it exactly, Charlotte. That's what I'm hoping about the DA. I think you're talking, right? Because he was really soft pedaling it with Cora, like a lot. But then again, since Tiffany Adams wasn't part of the preliminary hearing, really it was Paul Grice's testimony with Ted Cullum and the planning part with Ted Cullum and Cora that was important to make sure that Ted Cullum went to trial. True, Charlotte. The more information they have, the more that it can twist the defense. Look what they just did with Paul, trying to pin both murders on him, as if Ted didn't do anything. And I'm like, really, he can't be in two places at once. And there was two women. It's not like, all right, let's be reasonable. It's not like Jilian Kelley just stood there and watched it happen. There was obviously an altercation with her too at the same time. And it couldn't have been Paul because he had his hands full with Veronica Butler. So, yeah, I'm sure a jury's going to find their way around that one quite easily. Yeah. Well, I'm just looking to see any tags to make sure I don't miss any actual questions. Oh, you mean about the gun sleep? You could be right because they could have heard a gunshot. You could be right. Maybe they meant noisy and like too hard to cover up. That's true. That's true. Although I think it would have been more efficient than all those stab wounds. That's so like difficult, personal. I know that that's what most people believe around there, Charlotte. But Paul's testimony actually and Cora's actually are contrary to that. They literally have very little information on Jilian and talk about and also the autopsy report clearly shows defensive wounds. Veronica Butler had massive defensive wounds. It does appear that either a stab wound or the stun gun had incapacitated Jilian quickly. That is really all they know. Well, the autopsy report itself, in the condition of Jilian, Paul Grice's testimony that he didn't see a lot of blood on Jilian when he saw her eyes flutter. He saw very little, and it was all up near her head. And that is basically all the information that the family actually got, besides the autopsy report of the number of wounds that she has. So, yeah, she did not really come off very well. I mean, she has to tell the truth. You're right, Charlotte. So it's going to be gruesome just because of how uncaring she is about it and how she has hardly any effect when she's talking about it, like as if it's nothing. No remorse. I mean, it was kind of chilling. Most people reported that it was actually hard to watch because she really didn't have. She was saying horrible things, and it wasn't registering in her effect, like in how she was acting, you know. Mm. What I want to just see is Tiffany Adams having to pay for this and not doing anything slimy to get out of it. Liz, I don't know. Like, this woman doesn't seem right to me. The girl was only 16 years old. And why she would tell her daughter like that's something great? You don't talk to your daughter like it's your best friend anyway about everything that you do. Like, it's just there's something wrong there. She really felt they were doing the right thing because of the children. And she kept saying that. Not only that, in the indictment, it stated that the young girl said that she told her to go clean the car out because Cora and Cole were tired. They sent the girl to the car to clean it out, to wipe it down so there'd be no fingerprints or anything like that. I mean, trying to make her complicit, like as if this was all normal. And I just don't understand that at all. But the young girl did the right thing and told everything. It was the young girl's testimony that actually brought Paul Grice, which is a key factor in the whole case. That was the first time. It was her that talked about Paul being involved. If it wasn't for her, they never would have got them all. I think you're right, Charlotte. I know that she had a son too. In then when the police showed up, Cora and Cole tried to keep the police from talking to the kids at all, but they couldn't. I don't think she'll be able to get out of it either. I just like the maneuver that she pulled at the preliminary was just seems so disrespectful to everybody. I mean, she's just trying to save her skin, but even Tad Cullum, who's supposed to be her partner through thick and thin, was greatly unnerved by what she did. I just think the family deserves to watch her squirm. Not that I think she will, but it's almost like she gave them the big finger, like, you're not going to get me. Like, I'm just going to wave it. You're not going to watch me squirm or listen to anything about me. Yeah, like psycho controlling. I kind of agree, Charlotte. This was so disturbing about it. I really think she's got quite a few screws loose, dangerous ones. And I do hope that the court deals with her accordingly that way. Tad Colum seems very scary himself to be willing to do all of that cold blooded, um, with no evidence, because he had no evidence of it either. Nobody did. I don't think she cared about the children very much either. Why would she take them to the store where she was buying the devices to tie their mother up and to stun her and to dispose of her? That's just sick. And I'm glad she got additional charges for it. Because if she did think she's really doing, if she's that warped that she thought she was doing the right thing, then to know that the court is going to say, nope, you abused, neglected those children. I hope that stings, because those are her additional charges. You know, if she has any conscience, that should get to her. But on that, that is the sad tale for tonight. That's all we're going to talk about. Like, just that one. I wanted to get you updated on the preliminary hearing. What happens next? As there's several hearings for those that pled out and waived. We don't know about Cole, if he's going to take a plea or if he's going to plead guilty now after he heard the testimonies. He did waive his right to a speedy trial, so we'll have to keep our eyes open for that. We don't know if Tiffany Adams is working on anything either. She also waived her right to the preliminary into a speedy trial. The only one we know that's coming up to trial really soon is Tad Cullum, and that would be January 7th. We have a hearing, and we should get a trial date at that hearing. If or at least some type of scheduling idea. The rest of them, in February, we will get the sentencing and what happens to Cora, Twombly, and Paul Grice. But for right now, all five of them are in jail with no bond, no bail. Paul Grice may be dealing with some health issues because there was a bit of a scuttlebutt about him not being listed as actively in the jail as if he was released, and that was very uncomfortable because it got spread around, and I hope that the family didn't believe it, because how horrible would that be? um I mean, can you just imagine? You just heard testimony about how he killed your daughter and he walked. Like, no, he didn't walk. But because he was not physically in the jail, they may have mislabeled it. He may be in a medical facility, he may be getting treatment, or because of him pleading guilty, he may already be moved somewhere. We don't know. But there was a big scuttle about that. But he is not free. I just want to make that clearly clear. He is not free. He's still in custody. We're just not exactly sure where. He's not in Cook County. Or at least they said he wasn't. I think Ted wanted to go to trial with Tiffany, actually, and then hoping that they could put this abuse scenario to the jury for sympathy. Um, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. But I'll keep you guys up to date with other ones. I'll be back tomorrow with some other cases, some updates that are going on, probably around the same time. If I don't see you, I know it's New Year's Eve. I hope you're all doing something, nice for yourselves, getting ready for the new year. But I did want to get this one and give it the time that it deserved. It is very upsetting. I thank you, those who could stay and listen. And it's never my intent to upset anybody, but that had to be said exactly how it happened, you know. Well, everybody, take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon.